So recently I made a tier list video ranking a bunch of popular books that I've read, and you may or may not have seen it, but in that video I talked about some books that I've been really interested in, and more specifically I talked about two books that I'll be discussing, and that is George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. So these books are both dystopian fiction by British authors written in the 20th century, and I have this very keen interest in these two books, especially because I think the stuff that Aldous Huxley and George Orwell get into is incredibly interesting stuff, especially considering the political and cultural landscape of their own country in the following century. So Brave New World is a book that was actually written before 1984. It was written in the early 20th century, I believe, in the 1920s, by a prominent British writer, intellectual, scholar, Aldous Huxley. I think the ideas that are explored in Brave New World are incredibly interesting because the society that they live in essentially is people are sedated with drugs to keep them happy, and casual sex is completely normal, and there we see a complete collapse of the family system. The main character, when he falls in love, it's seen as very weird. Stuff like monogamy is seen as very weird, and falling in love, and parents, nobody has any parents, that were raised by the state. A lot of the stuff in this book, especially Brave New World, we can slowly see a shift going into that direction, and I think that's what's so crazy to think about, is that this book was written 100 years ago, and he outlined these values in the society A Brave New World, which is actually a quote taken from Shakespeare. Stuff like casual sex is completely normalized, and stuff like monogamy and relationships and family roles and stuff, it's people don't like that. It's seen as taboo, and it's not something that is illegal, of course, but it's very smart the way he puts it, because it's one of these things where no one's will actually outright stop you from doing this, but it's like a subtle coercion. I remember a scene in Brave New World that really highlights this well. The main character, he was brought to the office by his boss, and he was questioned about a relationship he had. He said, "Are you in a monogamous relationship?" It's like, that, we don't like what you're doing here. We don't want you to be representative of our company, and to be in a monogamous relationship, it looks bad. It makes us look bad because in the Brave New World society, that is the sort of thing that is frowned upon. And I think we see a very interesting parallel in modern UK society, not even just in UK, but in a lot of Western places, where it's kind of always been like that. Sometimes something is not implicitly allowed or something, but there's a very strong cultural and social stigma against or for certain things. The exact things that Aldous Huxley highlighted in this book are becoming more and more prominent as every single year passes, and it's not at all weird to imagine that we'll live in a very similar society not far from now. I think the main point that Aldous Huxley tries to get at in Brave New World is that society really can dictate what is seen as right and what is wrong, and beyond even making laws, it can enforce something without enforcing it, because culturally and socially it can normalize or stigmatize certain things, and that really changes how everyone lives, obviously, because what's normal and what's seen as not normal will slowly change the behavior and characteristics of everybody living in that society. And I think it's a very stark warning, saying you need to have the right values as a society, because if you like this society, if you put the values, if you say take away the parents, for example, or let's rely on drugs, or let's put people in class systems, then it can lead to this artificial world, exactly like what we're seeing with virtual reality and stuff. It's not a place that you're actually present in, and it leads to a very disjointed and atomized human experience. There was a very interesting idea, I think said by Voltaire: every man is a creature of the age he lives in, and few men can raise themselves above the ideas of the time. And I think it's very true, because when you look at it, a lot of people who live in certain situations, the only reason they believe certain things is because that is the cultural norm at the time. There's this idea that, if you lived in Nazi Germany, you'd be like the good guy helping everyone out. But in reality, most people would just go along with the flow, whether it's heinous or whether it's just something that could have been positive in another situation, because that's what we're most inclined to do. And a lot of the stuff we could be doing nowadays could be seen as completely heinous and atrocious by standards of 100 or 200 years from now. But we wouldn't know that, and that's why I think it's so important to have a moral compass that is different from what everybody around you says. It doesn't mean that it has to be different, but it's saying that it can't be based on that, because if it is, then you'll be a creature of the time, as Voltaire says. And of course, the other book that I really wanted to talk about, which we see more themes of authoritarianism, is George Orwell's 1984. And this book is, of course, amazing. I think the main thing that George Orwell really tackles is language and how language influences people. Stuff like doublethink, where you have opposite things, like an oxymoron. War is peace, love is hate, stuff like that. Basically making you think that two opposing concepts are the same. Really just manipulating how people think, I think there was this whole idea that Orwell had that if you take away the words to express certain things, you can't feel them. So if there isn't a word for freedom in the language that's in the book, it's called Newspeak, for example, then you can't have an idea of freedom. And the words we use, to an extent, they to determine our freedom that we can have. So if there's a very rich language, then it's in the interest of a state that wants to minimize their own people's liberty and control them, to get rid of those words, because those words give them freedom to express themselves. And it's a very interesting idea, because the world of 1984 by any metric is very bad, because it's completely authoritarian, and it has this big brother figure. They're watching everything you do, and there's absolutely no liberty in any sense. And it's not the fact that they have even a certain agenda, like in Brave New World, where you say, okay, this is what society sees as good, this is what society sees as bad. The 1984 message is very much what we see as good is submitting to the party and believing exactly what we say. And the main character, Winston, he works at a place where he literally changes history, where they might have said like, oh, the ration of chocolate is decreasing. I think this was an actual example. The ration of chocolate is decreasing from 50 grams to 40 grams. In the last week's newspaper, they'll actually say this week's newspaper that it's increasing from 30 grams to 40 grams, to basically change the way people view things. Because of course, if the ration's decreasing, it's seen as a bad thing, a sign of destitution, or if it's increasing, it's seen as a sign of prosperity. And I think even more, there was a very prominent idea in 1984 that there's these three superpowers that are constantly in war with each other, and the war, they're all too powerful to destroy each other on their own, but they're not going to unite. It's basically a war that continues on forever, and the main purpose is to keep the people poor and enslaved, because if there's a war, they always have like a common enemy. And even more interestingly is that people living in each of the states, they'll say, they'll constantly change who they're at war with. So they'll be like, this is our ally, this other state is our friend, one of the other two super states, and this is our enemy. And then the next week or something, they might switch around and then attack the other people. Almost everything that goes on in 1984 is done as a fear tactic, a way to oppress the people. That is almost the entire goal of the INCSOC Socialist Party in 1984. And I think George Orwell, especially if you read Animal Farm, he was very concerned with socialism and communism and what effect that can have on the Western world. And that's very much why he wrote 1984 as a cautionary tale, to saying, hold on, if communism makes wealth and power disperse, and then only only the elites can actually access this, then what sort of society does that lead to? The irony again is the fact that as the time has gone by, England and the United Kingdom are very much become a lot more socialist compared to before. Compared to something like America, it is more socialist with free healthcare and taxes. Of course, you can argue that whether you think it's a good or a bad thing, but it is the reality. And one of the other main themes in 1984 is free speech and being able to even think your own thoughts. Being able to even think something is not allowed. You're not meant to think anything that's opposing the party. So free speech is basically severely limited in the party. Even in the modern day, I mean, not only in the UK, but in a lot of other Western countries, I would say the UK and Canada are the worst for this. free speech is silenced, because if free speech only exists when you agree with it, then of course it's not free speech, because you have a condition. If you have a condition, like if you say the thing we agree with, then we allow it, then it's completely void of any meaning, of any true meaning. I remember reading about this in a book, but there was a woman in the UK called Muh'fucker that spoke up against transgender women, so biological men, using the women's bathroom in fear of the woman's safety. And she actually got fired from her job at a UK firm. And stuff like that is very prevalent in a lot of these Western countries. And even something like someone getting excluded from university for defending Andrew Tate. The main thing that I would highlight is I don't really believe that the context, the belief of the person even matters. I think every person, unless it incites direct violence, should be able to speak freely. A lot of people have critiques of America, but at least America have their amendments which give them their freedom. It says you cannot violate this. They are really liberating. I mean, it's the land of the free, because you're allowed to speak and do freely and protect yourself from all these things. Well, then they just abuse that. You know, they say, well, you offended this person. I think one of the most striking things is a lot of the smartest Englishmen of the past century, the stuff that they were criticizing back then is very much what England has actually formed into today. And to a large extent, it's sad to see, because it's just this amalgamation of factors. And I think very much what Aldous Huxley and George Orwell were worried about so much, the fact that Aldous Huxley saying, don't put the wrong values as virtues. You can't have a vice and like make the society see it as a virtue. Like exactly like not having parent roles, giving people drugs to sedate them. When that becomes a norm, that is what will lead to the downfall of society and the complete degradation of their own people. And when George Orwell was warning about socialism and communism and not allowing people to freely speak their mind, is very much what we are seeing in their own country 100 years later, which is very frightening, because if they're teaching something like 1984 in schools and they're not seeing the very own irony that they're propagating by not allowing people to freely exercise their own rights as people, then it's not down a very good path, I'll tell you that. Of course, I want to stay optimistic for the future, but I would say it's very much true that some countries are not down a good path. And I think the whole point of these stories is to serve as a cautionary tale and say, hey, we need to make sure it doesn't happen like this. And if we're looking at it and so 1984 and saying, well, of course it's not like that, of course it's not, we're allowed to speak freely, but only if X person agrees with us, but they're doing that for our good, you know? Like we just don't want to hurt other people. Then it falls down a slippery slope, because just as happens in 1984, you can always use language to manipulate people. And maybe in a society in the modern day, the way they'll be using language is to say, oh no, but this is for your own good. We're doing this in a benevolent manner. We want to help you. We're doing this to help other people. You must do this to help other people. And to be careful with such wordplay. To bring in something else, but just as Machiavelli says, people in power will use any manipulation and unjust tactics to manipulate people and to make people believe what they want them to believe, because you don't get in power by playing by the rules. So yeah guys, hope you enjoyed this video. I like talking about these books. I like talking about books in general, so if you like this sort of stuff, tell me, and if you got any suggestions, then yeah, leave it down below. And thanks, I'll see you next time.